Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. A few months ago, I had an experience that I believe others should know about, if only to avoid the pitfalls I encountered. When fantasy turns into reality, it may not be as enjoyable as one might expect. For years, I've indulged in the hobby of dressing up as a baby girl, mostly by myself. So, you can imagine my excitement when a couple of years ago, I connected with another adult baby who was open to mutual dressing up sessions and alternating roles of restraint. He had converted a spare room into a nursery, complete with an adult-sized high chair, a stroller, and a large cot, all equipped with multiple straps for secure restraint. Let's call him James. However, there was a complication. James's wife, whom I'll call Lisa, strictly forbade any other adult babies from visiting their home. This meant I could only visit when Lisa was away on business trips. As they say, if you want to avoid being discovered, don't do it. Easier said than done. Earlier this year, Lisa had to travel to a conference in Bournemouth for 5 days, presenting a perfect opportunity for James and me to indulge ourselves. On a cloudy Thursday morning, I arrived at James's house in Crawley with my suitcase full of baby clothes, ready to stay a couple of nights. James was eager for our planned evening, where he would be securely strapped into his cot under my supervision. After I arrived, we quickly changed into our baby outfits, securely pinned nappies, plastic pants, cute baby frocks, ankle socks, and Mary Jane shoes for me, and a baby bonnet for James. With my fairly long hair styled into 2 bunches secured with white ribbons and pink hair slides, we both looked quite adorable. Not sure what to do until evening, when I was to prepare James for bedtime, James suggested I spend some time in the pushchair. It sounded fun, so I agreed. James was skilled at restraining adult babies, as I soon discovered. He began by tightly wrapping strong packaging tape around my fists, rendering them useless lumps. Then, he placed fingerless white woolly mittens over them and secured them with pink ribbons at the wrists. Next, he fetched a pair of large pink leather baby reins adorned with 3 small bells. I put my arms through them, and he adjusted and buckled the straps behind me to secure the reins snugly. Next, he settled me into the pushchair and began securing me with numerous white leather straps. They held my ankles, waist, and neck, with 2 over my shoulders and 2 around my chest, fastening my baby reins to the pushchair. He clipped the reins onto the pushchair's D-rings and tightened them. Additionally, he strapped my wrists and upper arms to the sides of the pushchair, immobilizing my arms at my sides. To complete the restraint, he secured my legs together above the knees with another strap. The straps were tight, and I soon realized I could hardly move. I asked James to loosen them, but he just grinned and shook his head, denying my request. Then, unexpectedly, he retrieved an oversized baby's dummy from a drawer, specially made for adults. Despite my protests, he forced the large silicone rubber bulb into my mouth and secured it tightly with attached ribbons wound around my head and tied into a bow behind. Panicking, I realized how vulnerable and helpless I had become. I struggled to move or speak, but all that came out were muffled sounds like p, I was completely stuck, and James, grinning, remarked that I had asked for it and now I was getting it. James's mistake came next. He went over to the cot, climbed in, raised the sides, and proceeded to strap himself down as securely as he had restrained me in the pushchair. Soon, he too was immobilized, with his hands handcuffed, one to the cot's side and the other to a chain on the opposite side, the key within his reach to free himself later. Feeling increasingly nervous, I was now powerless to intervene. For about an hour, we lay there in mutual helplessness, squirming and babbling into our dummies like true babies. I have to admit, I found a strange enjoyment in it. Then disaster struck. I heard the front door open and close abruptly, followed by a voice calling out, "Hi James, I'm home." I knew instantly it was Lisa, and panic surged through me. Frantically, James struggled to reach the key that would release him, but he had deliberately made it hard to access. Seconds later, His wife entered the room, glanced at me briefly, and swiftly moved to where James was desperately trying to free himself. "Oh no you don't," she declared, snatching the key from his grasp. I groaned inwardly, realizing how precarious our situation had become. Lisa was clearly livid, and as she looked down at James, she exclaimed, "How could you? I trusted you, and you've betrayed me like this, just when you thought I was away. You fool, did you not consider that I might return early? You're as foolish as you are deceitful." She gradually calmed down and stood at the center of the room, frowning as she contemplated her next steps. Turning her gaze from one to the other, she remained silent for a full 5 minutes. Studying me with a thoughtful expression, a slow grin spread across her face, eventually breaking into a broad smile. "Very well," she declared. "If you both insist on behaving like babies, then babies you shall be. You'll regret starting this, believe me. Let's begin with you, James." She walked over to the cot and meticulously tightened James's restraints, extending his arms fully so he couldn't budge an inch. Satisfied with his dummy's security, she then turned her attention to me. "I don't know who you think you are," she said, a grim smile playing on her lips as she looked down at me. "But you'll regret ever stepping foot in here." Though I hadn't met Lisa before, James's warnings about her made me uneasy. Methodically, just as she had with James, she checked and tightened my pushchair restraints. She lifted the hem of my baby frock to inspect what I wore underneath. "Excellent," she grinned. "A nappy and plastic pants. Good thing too, because I have plans that'll make you thankful you're wearing them. If you feel like wetting, or better yet, soiling that nappy, feel free. You'll just have to sit in it like a true baby, won't you?" She seemed to read my thoughts, chuckling as she spoke. "Yes, that's right. You wanted to be a little baby girl, so I'll oblige. But it'll be much longer than you had in mind. But first, let's capture this for the record." She left the room briefly and returned with a camera, snapping numerous photos of us from various angles, focusing particularly on close-ups of my face. "Now," she said, setting the camera aside and grinning at me, "I need to go shopping. Fortunately for you, little girl, you're already conveniently strapped into your pushchair, aren't you? You know what that means, don't you?" I did, and panic surged as I realized her intentions. I struggled against my restraints, trying to protest. All that came out were muffled sounds like mmf, mmp, as I stared wide-eyed at her over my dummy. With each passing moment, I felt more like an actual baby. Lisa walked over to the cot, giving James's restraints a final check. "Now, don't get into any mischief while I'm gone, all right?" she warned. "Come to think of it, I should give you 2 babies' names. James, you'll be Emily, and the baby in the pushchair, I'll call Olivia." "Yes, perfect. Come along, Olivia, let's go shopping." She approached me, placing a shopping bag in the pushchair's basket. After releasing the brake, she began to wheel me out of the room and into the hallway. Pausing to put on her raincoat, she opened the front door and guided me onto the front path before closing the door behind her. It felt like a nightmare. I strained against my restraints, desperate as she pushed me relentlessly along the pavement toward the town's shopping area. It was hard to believe this was happening to me. The first to notice us were 3 young women who clearly enjoyed a bit of humor. Lisa deliberately stopped as they approached, and the girls burst into laughter at the sight of me up close. They asked Lisa what was going on, and she told them I had lost a bet and was now paying the price. The girls found it hilarious, with one even taking pleasure in readjusting one of my hair ribbons before they moved on, and we continued our journey. As we neared the town center, I squirmed in my pushchair restraints, desperately trying to hide my flushed face, though the neck strap held my head up, making it futile. I let out a muffled, babyish gurgle into my dummy as she wheeled me into the Mothercare baby shop, much to the amusement of the shop assistants. Lisa made some purchases, ensuring to conceal them from my view, before continuing her shopping. I'll spare the details of what it was like in the supermarket. Let's just say it was the most humiliating experience of my life. By the time Lisa finished checking out with her groceries, I was nearly in tears. She then decided to enjoy a leisurely cup of coffee at an outdoor table, intentionally positioning the pushchair so I was fully visible to every passerby. I squirmed and wriggled with embarrassment at the giggles and comments, amplified by Lisa's remarks that only added to my humiliation. As she finished her coffee, the overcast skies gave way to rain, and she seized the opportunity to highlight my babyish predicament once more. Retrieving a clear plastic rain cover from under the pushchair, she raised the hood and draped the cover over me, fastening it with press-stud closures. Then, she pulled up the hood of her raincoat and continued wheeling me through the precinct towards home. Sheltered from the rain under the pushchair hood and clear cover, but still fully exposed to every amused onlooker, I felt even more like a helpless baby. Finally, we arrived home, and Lisa wheeled me back into the room where James lay in his cot. At this point, I naively believed my punishment was over and Lisa would release me. But I was mistaken. She wanted to ensure I never considered returning, and so I was in for the long haul. After removing the rain cover and lowering the pushchair hood, Lisa went into the kitchen, where I could hear her bustling about. It wasn't long before she returned with a tray, setting it down on the table. I didn't like what I saw and soon understood why she had visited the baby shop. The tray held several bowls of baby food, 2 baby bottles with teats, and 2 bibs. Starting with James, she tied a bib around his neck and warned us both, "I'm going to feed you, so I'll have to remove your dummies for a while. But remember, any word from either of you and those dummies go back in, along with some tasty slugs and insects from the garden. Consider yourselves warned." We remained silent, understanding the consequence. Lisa removed James's dummy and began spoon-feeding him the baby food. Once done, she placed the bottle's teat in his mouth, and he had to suckle it dry like a true baby. After replacing his dummy and securing it tightly, she cheerfully said, "Well done, Emily is fed. Now it's Olivia's turn." I then endured the same humiliating feeding ritual as James, consuming jars of vegetable puree, bowls of baby cereal, a bowl of chocolate mousse, and finishing my milk bottle. When done, Lisa pushed my dummy back into my mouth, securing it even tighter than before. Stepping back with a grin, Lisa announced, "Now, my 2 little babies, your troubles are just beginning. I fed you a special treat." Each bowl of chocolate mousse was laced with a whole packet of grated laxative chocolate and a hefty dose of ground senna tablets. Within 12 hours, you'll both have very full nappies, and there's nothing you can do about it. Being babies isn't all fun. You'll learn the discomfort of lying in a heavily soiled nappy for hours and the painful nappy rash that follows. A couple of days like this should teach you a lesson. If I decide to extend your punishment, I'll leave you in it until I'm satisfied you've learned your lesson. Oh, and Olivia, tomorrow I'm taking you to visit one of my friends. Won't that be lovely for you, especially with a full nappy?" With a laugh, she collected the dirty plates and bottles and took them to the kitchen. I couldn't believe I had willingly walked into this nightmarish scenario, and I could only gurgle into my dummy with a mixture of humiliation and frustration. After a few hours, Lisa returned with blankets to cover us up, indicating bedtime. She kindly removed our dummies, knowing they would hinder sleep, but warned that any noise would result in their immediate return. This threat ensured our complete silence. As darkness settled, I managed to doze off intermittently under the warm blanket. Initially, sleeping was as challenging as on a long flight, but as the night progressed, an inevitable urge to relieve myself emerged. Resisting wetting myself became a futile effort. The pressure in my bladder mounted until I had no choice but to release. Warm urine soaked my nappy, turning it into a soggy mass encased in plastic baby pants. Helpless to change my situation, I relaxed and drifted back to sleep. At dawn, I awoke to James quietly moaning in his cot, soon realizing why. Suddenly, a gurgling sound emanated from my bowels, signaling movement within. With daylight streaming in, James began to writhe against his restraints as the potent laxatives took effect on both of us. My bowel movements increased in frequency and intensity, and I struggled to maintain control. Despite squeezing my buttocks tightly together and squirming within my restraints, The pushchair held me firmly in place. Eventually, Lisa got up, appearing fully dressed with a cup of coffee in hand. After inspecting our bonds without needing adjustment, she remarked with a smile, "Did I hear some moaning? That won't do. Looks like you two babies need your dummies." Despairingly, I watched as she secured James's dummy tightly in his mouth before turning to do the same to me. Our efforts to free ourselves grew more frantic. Lisa chuckled knowingly, remarking, "Oh my, I knew this punishment would be effective, but I didn't realize how entertaining it would be. Come on babies, show me how good little girls fill their nappies." At this point, desperation overcame me as I felt the contents of my bowels inexorably moving toward release. I strained and groaned, knowing I couldn't hold on any longer. With a sob of humiliation, I finally let go, and a warm, sticky flood filled my nappy. It seeped into the damp cloth, squelching around my bottom with every movement. I was devastated with embarrassment as Lisa burst into laughter. Well, she grinned, "That's one little baby with a dirty nappy. Now for the other one." She didn't have to wait long. Almost immediately, James emitted a muffled cry of anguish as he too endured the ordeal of soiling his nappy. Lisa clapped her hands gleefully. "Lovely," she laughed, "absolutely perfect. Two completely helpless little baby girls waiting for their nappies to be changed. Well, you can wait another 24 hours like that. By tomorrow morning, you'll both have nappy rash that'll last at least a week. Nothing like a sore bottom to teach you a lesson. Now, I'll get you your breakfast." The next 24 hours were perhaps the worst of my life. We were fed our baby breakfasts and promptly had our dummies tightly secured in our mouths again, leaving us only able to utter muffled babyish gurgles. True to her previous threat, Lisa decided it was time to parade me to the world again. I endured another outing in the pushchair, feeling the uncomfortable squelching around my bottom the whole time. This time, she took me to visit one of her friends, who delighted in teasing me before Lisa finally took me home. Another night in the pushchair followed, with some residual accidents in my nappy. Finally, Saturday afternoon arrived. Around tea time, Lisa entered the room, untied my dummy, and removed it from my mouth. I sighed with relief, relieved to move my aching jaw. But my relief was short-lived, as Lisa had one last surprise in store. She carefully removed the securing ribbons from the dummy, leaving me momentarily puzzled. It didn't take long to understand why, and I certainly didn't like it. She moved to the side, briefly picking up a small tube before setting it down. Turning back to me, she instructed, "All right Olivia, open your mouth, there's a good girl, and be quick if you want me to untie you." I complied obediently, my main thought being to get the dummy out of my mouth as soon as possible. With a wide grin, Lisa pushed the dummy back in and held it firmly in place for about half a minute. Unsure of her intentions, I was determined to spit it out as soon as she released me. A moment later, she murmured satisfactorily and moved over to James. Leaning into the cot, she removed his dummy. Like me, he sighed in relief as she set his dummy aside, removing the securing ribbons as she went. She paused briefly with her back to us before returning to James, who lay helplessly restrained. "Now it's your turn, Emily," she said. "Open up." Thinking along the same lines as I did, he allowed her to reinsert the dummy into his mouth, and once again, she held it firmly in place for about half a minute. Straightening up with a chuckle, she grinned widely and said, "Excellent. Now you can spit your dummies out if you want to. If you can, that is." She burst out laughing. Immediately, I tried to push my dummy out with my tongue. It wouldn't budge. Puzzled, I pushed again with the same result, shaking my head in frustration as I desperately tried to remove it. It was impossible. "Yes." Lisa laughed gleefully as James and I mumbled baby talk around our dummies, desperate to remove them. "You can't spit them out, can you? And do you know why? Before I put your dummies in your mouths, I coated the inner surface with a generous layer of superglue." "That's right, superglue. Those dummies are stuck in your mouths until you can get hold of some solvent. Unfortunately for you, The shops have just closed and won't open again until Monday. So, my two little babies, you'll have to suck on your dummies until tomorrow. I imagine you'll be quite hungry by then. And as for you, my friend, she chuckled, looking at me, I'd love to see you on the train home with your dummy. You'll certainly attract quite a bit of attention. I broke into a cold sweat, realizing I would indeed have to endure that. With a final giggle, Lisa bent over me, released my hands, and removed the mittens and packing tape that had imprisoned them. You can free yourself now, she said. Then you can untie him. Don't ever show your face in this house again, unless you want another dose of the same. Next time, you'll spend a full week in that pushchair, so I wouldn't risk it if I were you. Remember, I have those lovely photos of you, and thanks to your wallet, I know who you are, where you live, and where you work. I'm sure you wouldn't want those pictures ending up somewhere embarrassing. I shuddered at the thought and murmured my agreement. All right, she said to James, I'm going out now. You two can clean yourselves up. And as for you, she looked at me with a grin, you'd better be gone when I get back. Adding with amusement, at least you won't be able to talk to each other while I'm gone, will you? She walked out of the room and a moment later, out the front door. Quickly, I released myself and then helped James, and we began tugging at our dummies, desperate to remove the humiliating objects from our mouths. But it was futile. The superglue had effectively bonded the area around our mouths to the dummy plates, and the resilient plastic resisted all efforts to even damage them. Using cutting tools was out of the question, risking serious injury. In hopeless silence, we looked at each other as the rings on our dummies swung back and forth. Resigned, we stiffly made our way to the bathroom. I won't dwell on the unpleasantness of cleaning ourselves with toilet paper and soap and water. It gave me newfound respect for nurses and carers. The moment the hot water hit my backside in the shower, a searing pain shot through my nappy rash. I let out a muffled yell into my dummy but had no choice but to endure it. After showering and dressing, still with our dummies firmly in place, we exchanged miserable gurgles of goodbye. With a gulp, I stepped out the front door with my bag of baby clothes and made my way down the street to the station. The journey home was a nightmare, just as Lisa had predicted. I attracted amused attention from anyone who saw me, and the dummy silenced me, leaving no way to explain. Even arriving home, I faced 36 more hours with the dummy securely glued in my mouth, and the raw soreness of my nappy rash lingered for days. Going to the hardware store Monday morning for superglue solvent was no easier. The guys there laughed when they saw my predicament, but at least I finally freed myself from the dummy. I didn't explain how it ended up stuck. I just said some friends played a prank the night before. And so ended my horrendous journey into the world of being an adult baby. It didn't stop me from occasionally dressing up, but it certainly taught me to choose my associates more carefully in the future.